Well, these are tough times for some of the most prominent universities in the country. Of course, we saw the meltdown on Capitol Hill last week for the university presidents of Penn, Harvard, and MIT. One of those three, the Penn president, is already out of her position. The other two appear to be safe, believe it or not. Someone who's got great perspective on this is Bill Jacobsen. He is a professor at Cornell Law School. He is the founder of LegalInsurrection.com, doing great work there. Bill, we haven't spoken since this higher education debacle's unfolded over the last 2 months. I want to start 35,000-foot view. What's your takeaway from what you've seen happen on some of these campuses, since you know them pretty well the last couple of months?
Yeah, I think the big takeaway is that this did not start on October 7th, that this is something that has been building on campuses for at least 2 decades. The entrenched and pervasive anti-Americanism, anti-Westernism, anti-Semitism, call it what you want, CRT, DEI, anti-racism, anti-capitalism, all those things. This has captured the universities, particularly the elite universities, less so community colleges, other universities like that. And so this was building. We've seen a lot of signs of it over the last several years, particularly, and this was what brought it to the surface. So people need to understand that this is not an October 7th problem. October 7th, of course, being the date of the Hamas attack on Israel. This is a 2-decade problem, and it shows how entrenched these problems are at campuses, that you have mobs of students, sometimes mobs of faculty, chanting for violence.
You know, I don't know how long you've been there with Cornell, but like what triggered this a couple of decades ago to start building the way it's building, which, as you noted, kind of led us to where we're at today?
I don't think there was one thing that triggered it. I think you have to look at 2 or 3 different strains of campus activity. One is the racialization of campuses. Now, everything, and this is, again, not just this year, everything is focused on race. And if you notice, the students chanting in favor of Hamas and against Israel frame this as people of color versus white Israel. Of course, that's a false construct, but that's how they're framing it. That's how they think about it. They think about this as Israel is the white supremacy state, just like they view the U.S. as the white supremacy state. And so that's how they frame it. So that's one strain, the racialization of campus. Then I think it's the homogenation and radicalization of campuses. There are very few dissenting voices left on campuses. Conservative professors don't get hired and haven't been hired for the most part for the last 20 years. Pro-Israel, openly pro-Israel professors don't get hired. So you have no countervailing voices. Instead, you have relentless dehumanization of Israel and, by extension, Jews. Those are kind of the main strains.
How do they go about, I mean, you know, in these application process and figuring out who fits the worldview that they are looking to push on their students?
Well, there are many different ways. They don't have to ask the question. Everybody knows when you're applying what these elite schools are looking for. Now, some of them did have officially required diversity, equity, and inclusion statements, but that's a relatively recent phenomenon. That's maybe 3 or 4 years old. But the word gets out. The people who are on the hiring committee, it's well known. I've had multiple people over the years say to me, you know, who are PhD candidates and want to go into academia, they leave anything related to Israel off their CVs. They have nothing, no trail, because they know they won't get hired. So it's a nod and a wink, and who controls the hiring committees. And so the word gets out, and I think the word is out. If you're conservative, you're unlikely to get hired. Not impossible, but unlikely. And if you're openly pro-Israel, it's extremely difficult to get hired. And you do that over 2 decades, all of a sudden there are no countervailing voices on campus.
Bill Jacobsen, he is the founder of LegalInsurrection.com. He is a Cornell Law School professor as well. Bill, this last week, we saw the Capitol Hill hearings for the presidents at Penn, Harvard, and MIT. I'm sure you weren't surprised knowing what you've seen on college campuses yourself, but a lot of America was shocked by it, that those professors or those presidents could not just state the obvious. Why do you think they weren't able to do it?
Well, I think I had two big takeaways from those hearings. One is how unimpressive the presidents of our most elite and leading universities are. I mean, this is who's leading our best and brightest universities, which of course calls into question whether they are really our best and brightest universities. So that was my one big takeaway. These were like functionaries. They came across as bureaucrats, and so that was a big takeaway, and it's scary in its own right. The other thing is they are very sensitive to what I've just described about the uniformity of hostility to capitalism, to the United States, and to Israel among the faculty. When I say uniformity, that doesn't mean every person does, but certainly the loudest people do. And among the students, they're afraid of their own campuses. I think that's true. I think that's true for a lot of universities. At Cornell, one of the anti-Israel student groups occupied the president's offices or suite recently. So I think that they're afraid. So they're bureaucrats and they're afraid.
So now you got one of those presidents, the Penn president, that was shown the door, but the Harvard president, who also was caught up in this plagiarism scandal, ends up keeping her job. So what do we read into that? If you check off enough boxes, you can save yourself from something like last week?
Well, I think there's no question there's a very different treatment. And I think it's a fair question. If the president of Harvard had been either a white woman or a white man, would she have survived this? And I think the answer is no, she wouldn't have. And just like the president of Penn, the president of Penn didn't have a plagiarism problem. The president of Harvard has a serious plagiarism problem. They're rallying around her and they're trying to, talk it away. But this is somebody with a very thin research record for somebody who's president of arguably the most prestigious university in the country. Some might disagree, but it's certainly near there. And very thin research resume, very thin resume to begin with, and then gets caught plagiarizing. And whether you call it serious plagiarism or not serious plagiarism, it was plagiarism. And that she is still there is astounding. But Harvard is in a really difficult position, having built their campus identity in the last decade or so around DEI, around racial politics, around those things. How can they're boxed in now. What are they going to do? So I think it's pretty pathetic. I think it's a reflection of what's happening at our universities. And I think that if she were anybody else, she wouldn't be there right now. And I think anybody who disagrees with that, I think, is either not being honest or kidding themselves.
Now, what about the future? And this is probably a future conversation for us, but just to put a bow on it for today, Elon Musk announced that he's opening up a STEM university in Austin, Texas. So he's going to be doing something that's really just focused on the basics, I guess, and getting more science, technology folks out into the workforce. What is the future? It's not going to change tomorrow or next year or heck, 5 years from now. But are we starting this process where higher education is going to look different in a generation than it does today? And is this expediting that process?
Well, it is expediting it. I think that's a great move, assuming it happens. I think what we need to get away from is the credentialism that the Ivy League and certain other prestigious university degrees are so important that you're willing to go there and essentially be abused and be discriminated against because you want that on your resume. We have to debrand the Ivy League and the elite schools and get to recognize that whatever they once might have been, whatever function they might have served as a screening mechanism to reflect people who have great merit to themselves, they're not anymore. They're highly politicized, they're highly racialized, and I think we need alternatives, and we need to stop as a society thinking that having Harvard on your resume, and I do have Harvard on my resume, is a sign of anything other than that you have Harvard on your resume.
Always great work from Bill Jacobsen. Find them and look them up at legalinsurrection.com. They're doing great work there every single day. Bill, thank you so much for this perspective, and we're grateful for your time. Have a great day and a great weekend.
Thank you.
All right. Bill Jacobsen on KCMO Talk Radio.